Drew here, and it is inevitable that I am going to refer to this series as either Outer Banks or Open Range. It's just gonna happen, I'm sorry. But in all seriousness, summing up my feelings about this, if I were asked, do I recommend this series or not, I would have to say that I don't recommend it. Now, I caveat that with the fact that I'm definitely gonna keep watching just to see where things go, because I'm intrigued by some of the elements that this series has introduced in the first two episodes. But overall, if this turns out to be a more interesting series than I think it is, that they must have buried the lead in the first two episodes, because inevitable Yellowstone comparisons aside, I feel that this is a show without a significant audience. Josh Brolin plays Royal Abbott. He's the head of this family that is going through hard times for a variety of reasons. Their neighbors, the Tillersons, are trying to take a bunch of their land away. His son's wife disappeared months ago, and no one knows what happened to her. There's other circumstances that come about in the pilot episode that just create a lot of troublesome issues for him. And he's a very simple man of few words, someone who lives by the land, who has a great value on loyalty and heritage, and is really trying to be a good father and a good husband to his wife, played by Lily Taylor. And all of this, this stuff, like I said, it feels like it could be at home in Yellowstone. It feels like a very, very earthy, realistic show with some narrative twists going on. And essentially, it feels like, a horse opera. But then you introduce the element that I'm sure stood out to people if they watch the trailer for this, which is this metaphysical black chasm that opens up on his land, and which Royal doesn't really have a good explanation for. And this is the element that really, I think stands out in this show. It's also an element that's really, really hard to accept. And Will Patton apparently told the showrunner and creator, Brian Watkins, who has never written anything for movies or television before, but he's a very esteemed playwright. Apparently, Patton told him that he finally grasped to what the show was about, which is man's feeble attempts to reckon with the transcendent. And from that perspective, I guess the black hole makes sense. It makes sense why it's not a larger element in the show, because it's more representative of the other struggles that the characters are having. There's a monologue in the second episode, a very, very interesting monologue by Josh Brolin's character. It starts out as a prayer and gradually becomes more sincere and more brutal. And this moment kind of, I think, was when the symbolism of this black hole became more clear to me, and when I started to grasp the purpose of it in the show. But on the whole, no pun intended, on the whole, I feel that this element very, very easily could have been removed from the show, and the show would feel relatively similar. Because at least in the first two episodes, they have 6 more episodes to do more with this, it feels like it's there to make the show more unique rather than to actually serve the narrative. Because when you take this narrative a mile out, it feels like a lot of quotidian, everyday, down-to-earth plot lines. You've got one of Josh Brolin's sons played by Lewis Pullman. He wants to be a rodeo rider, and the show devotes a fair bit of time to that plot line. You have the missing wife of his other son, and what that is doing to Tom Pelphrey, and how that is driving him to actions that he can't take back. There's a big, shocking moment in the pilot that I don't want to spoil, but suffice to say it has consequences for the rest of the series. And, there's the wife who's grappling, Lily Taylor, who's grappling with just, faith and where they all fit as a family into God's plan. And, of course, you've got Josh Brolin, who's a classic example of still waters run the deepest. This character who's very quiet and doesn't say a lot, but there's a lot going on underneath the surface. He has these moments where his passion, where his anger, where his rage breaks out, and you see that his veneer of calm is just that there's a lot going on in his soul that doesn't immediately become obvious. And the conflict with the Tillerson family, it's a conflict that seems born out of a more traditional story, again, as all these elements do. And Will Patton, he gets an excellent monologue in the second episode as well. He's a very eccentric and bizarre character, someone who you really, really hate, I have to say, at least in the first 2 episodes, for what he's doing to the Abbott family, for his greed, for the fact that he wants to take land from them, that he has no remorse, and that he just seems to feel entitled to do whatever he wants to do and to take whatever he wants to take. And doesn't really show a whole lot of human concern for his sons in very obvious ways. So all this stuff, like I said, it feels like it could be in a horse opera. And then you've got this metaphysical chasm, this black hole, and the character of Autumn, played by Imogen Poots, who is this young woman who wanders on to the Abbott family ranch and has secrets that are slowly going to be unveiled. And there's some shocking moments with this character, and it's definitely intriguing what's going on with her, what she knows that she's not letting on. She comes onto the ranch, she claims to be a poet, but there's something more going on with her, something even menacing perhaps. And her history seems linked to this more surreal aspect of the show, this black hole. And I think that that's the main reason I'm intrigued to continue, is just to figure out what's going on there with her character and with this black hole. I feel like her scenes where she squares off with Royal, I feel like those were the more interesting scenes in the episode and the things that made this show feel different than the norm. The problem is if you're someone who came into this show looking with interest at these more surreal aspects, there's not nearly enough of them in the first 2 episodes. They kind of feel like almost an afterthought. Like symbolically, I feel like they add a little bit to the show, and there's definitely an intriguing mystery here. And the obvious comparison points are like Twin Peaks, The OA, and shows like that, where there's a supernatural element that has a symbolic role in everything going on. But I feel that there's just not nearly enough of this to justify its inclusion. It feels, like I said, like more of an afterthought. And there's a lot of scenes with it that come across, because of the tone of this thing, because it's very, very somber and doesn't seem very self-aware. To me, there's a lot of scenes that come across as both unintentionally hilarious and just kind of tonally off-putting. I think, generally speaking, that if you cut out the black hole, this show would just feel very, very standard. But with its inclusion, I don't know that it feels more worth your time at the present for me. I feel that the writing is very, very strong for what it's going for. I think that there's a lot of plot lines that don't really pull together. They all feel kind of disparate, and that they're just kind of there to fill out the runtime of the series. But they kind of keep the elements with the black hole from getting enough development in the early going. Like, I feel like there's probably like 5 minutes in each of the first 2 episodes devoted to this black hole. And at the present, it just kind of feels like it's just there. It's not an element that throws the other plot lines into relief or adds to your understanding. It feels kind of as if you were watching, let's say, a crime drama set in New York City, but the characters were just randomly using laser guns. Like, you would question why that element was included. You would be like, surely this means something. And you could probably, you know, dig deep and come up with all sorts of conclusions. But at the end of the day, it's like, this is just a, you know, crime drama with laser guns. It didn't have to be laser guns. It could have just as easily have been regular guns, and it wouldn't have been that different as a series. And that's how I feel the black hole kind of plays into this series, where it's there. It does make you question a lot about this series, but when you know, take this series from a mile high, it feels like a bunch of normal plot lines playing out with this random black hole included. And why it's there, you know, is the most interesting question to ask about it. It doesn't feel, though, like it had to be there. I feel like they could have had the plot lines play out fairly similarly without the inclusion of this black hole. You know, I think the main reason that I say I can't recommend this show to most people is that for people that are looking at the more grounded plot lines with interest, they're going to be thrown for a loop by this black hole. They're going to have a fairly similar reaction to Josh Brolin's character. And if you're here for the more, you know, metaphysical, for the more abstract, surreal aspects, there's just not enough of them to hold your interest. Most of this 2-episode start to the series just feels like a typical Yellowstone type series, a typical horse opera. And you really only get, like I said, like 5 minutes in each episode of the surreal aspects. So you're going to be disappointed if you're coming here for a sci-fi thriller. So to me, I feel like the elements never really gel. It doesn't really come together in the first 2 episodes. And maybe that'll improve. It definitely seems like a well-made series, very, very well directed by Alonso Ruiz Palacios. I think he did a very good, competent job in the first 2 episodes, and I think that overall this seems like it's going to be a very well-directed and well-written series. The dialogue doesn't over-explain things. The characters show a lot of texture just through their interactions and through their actions. There's not an overabundance of dialogue, but when there is, some of it definitely shows the pedigree of the showrunner, you know, this very, very renowned playwright who wrote another play with some similar themes to this one. The Wyoming scenery is nice. I wouldn't say the cinematography was spectacular. I wouldn't say this show had a particularly unique style in the first 2 episodes. The special effects are okay. The music is decent. You know, the performances are, you know, they range from good to very good. In the case of Josh Brolin and Will Patton, I think that they're head and shoulders above the rest of the cast. So there's, you know, I could see someone liking this show. There's definitely a lot of interesting elements, but I don't think that they overall come together. So I wouldn't recommend this show to most people, as I said. For me, I'm going to keep watching because I'm intrigued enough by the cliffhangers in the first 2 episodes to do with the mystery surrounding this black hole and what's going on with Autumn. But I feel like this is one for the birds. I just don't think that most people are going to find this something that they feel compelled to watch as more than a curiosity piece. But those are just my thoughts for what they are worth. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know why you are intrigued by this show, if you are, and why I'm wrong. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing to this channel. And as always, thank you for watching.